And we're live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. We've got some big stories to talk about today. The big one that I'm going to be spending the most time on is that southern snow/ice storm that is currently in Texas is going to be working its way and actually strengthening as it moves through Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and then it's going to work its way up into the Ohio Valley and then up into the East Coast and finally into the Northeast. So that's what we're going to be spending the most time on today, and it actually is perfectly related to the other thing we're going to be spending a large amount of time on today, that Arctic blast of cold air that is still over the central parts of the country, working all the way from Texas up into Minnesota, and then even pushing farther east now as it gets into the Midwest and will continue to push east as we move throughout this week. There is some good news though. I know everyone who lives in this area is probably sick of this cold. It's been over us for about 2 weeks now, 35 to 45 degrees below average temperatures, often temperatures below zero, some wind chill warnings where it gets as cold as negative 50. There is good news. On the horizon, as we're going to be talking about throughout this video, this cold air finally seems to be weakening as we move throughout the rest of this week, and it's still going to be cold as we get into this weekend. You can see getting into Saturday, there are still places 25 to 30 degrees below average, but it's at least not 50 degree below average anymore. And then as we push even farther into the forecast, by the end of the weekend, we should be back towards normal temperatures, and then towards this time next week, we're actually back to above average temperatures throughout much of the eastern half of the country. So that is some great news there. Quite possibly the longest introduction I've ever done. The two things I always say: one, there's going to be a lot that we're talking about today. So if you're only interested in one region, you can go down in the comments below where I put the timestamps for the different stories we're going to be talking about. And two, forecasts change incredibly fast. What's true one day might not be true tomorrow, so you should make sure that this is in fact my most recent forecast, as it's pretty crucial with weather to always stay updated with the most current information, because as we saw, especially last week, the models do change. So the big story is that southern snowstorm, ice storm, the bitter cold temperatures, and you can see what it's causing on the warnings map here. We have this strip of winter storm warnings stretching all the way from Texas up into West Virginia and Virginia, and then we have advisories up in the Northeast where the storm's going to be affecting those regions farther into the future. But you can see that strip of winter storm warnings with the bulk of it, even though it stretches over this long distance, the bulk of the impacts are going to be felt right around eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and then we'll also dive into Virginia, North Carolina, and West Virginia, where the storm's actually going to strengthen again up there. But the big thing I'm concerned about right now is what's going on in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana. We're going to be especially looking at who's going to be getting the most ice. Where is that ice going to be falling? How much? When is it going to be falling? Because it's the ice that I think is the big impact with this storm. That's what makes your travel and your roadways dangerous, and then can also lead to some of those power outages that are unfortunately such a big story right now. But again, there is a silver lining. With that cold air starting to weaken, some of those impacts will start to reduce as we move forward. I know the cold air has been here for 2 weeks, but the end is in sight. I'll put it that way. So the next few days are still going to be extremely cold, but then at least things are looking up in the near future. But again, on this map, major impacts expected in Arkansas and Mississippi. That's due to heavy snow accumulations, mostly in Arkansas, and then also ice accumulations in the southern parts of the state, working into Louisiana and eastern Texas as well. So you can actually see that on this map. As I click through here, we can watch this storm as it moves from Texas up into the northeast. Right there, the thing you want to look out for, the blue color is the snow, the red is the ice or the freezing rain, and then the green is your rain. So as you go through there, the key spot I always look out for is that freezing rain right there, because that's where you get the ice. That's where you feel the greatest impacts. But then you also see there is some heavy snow building into Arkansas, so that is going to lead to some impacts there as well. But notice how that storm appears to strengthen as it moves through Texas, through Louisiana, into Mississippi. And I have a graphic that explains that later. It's basically due to all this moisture being pulled in from the Gulf of Mexico. You can actually see the storm energy on this one map I'll show you, while at the same time it's pulling that cold air down, which is allowing that snow and ice to form as far south as Texas and Louisiana. It's really a combination of one, this storm moving through, and then two, that cold air that is still over this region. So then you can see it's going to work its way up and actually appear to strengthen again as it starts pulling in some moisture from the Atlantic, dropping ice and heavy snow over West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. Then finally it works up into the Northeast, and we were talking about this yesterday. This is the big question mark on the forecast of what this low pressure is going to do after it moves off the coast of Virginia. If it moves right along the coast, then the Northeast can see maybe a foot of snow. And that is what it was showing yesterday. If it moves straight off into the Atlantic, the Northeast might not get any snow. Right now, it appears it's right in between the two. It's not right along the coast, but it's also close enough that we will still be getting some snow in the Northeast. So we will be looking at that, but again, that's a ways off in the forecast, so we'll have to keep our eye on what that low ends up doing as it moves along the coast. In my experience, that seems to be one of the things that the forecast models aren't the best at forecasting. That and snow totals more than 3 days out. I'm usually pretty shaky to feel too confident in the forecast until you're right on the date itself. And then the one other thing you might have been noticing throughout this forecast map as I click through is there's another storm system coming into the west. Well, that's not the big story today. The big story is obviously that ice storm that's stretching from Texas up through Virginia and the temperatures down there, which are causing all the power outages. That is certainly the big story, but I will mention this one as well because there are some locations throughout Washington, Oregon, California that should be picking up over a foot of snow over the next few days with that next system that's going to be pushing through. So what I like to do is just take a look at the overall precipitation that's going to be expected. So keep in mind, this is mostly useful for looking at where that heavy rain is going to be. Looks like Georgia, South Carolina, Florida are where we could be getting over 4 inches of rain with this system as it pushes through. And then the coast of Oregon and California is where we're going to be picking up maybe 1 inch to 2 inches of rain with that other system. But the real thing that you're probably concerned about is the snow and the ice, because that's what for the most part leads to the impacts. When you get 4 inches of rain, that could certainly lead to some flooding, and I'll have to keep my eye out for any warnings in that area. But personally, what I'm most concerned about is the snow and the ice. So if we look at the snow first, you can see that strip as it moves. It's actually a pretty interesting graphic. You can see it just spread out from Louisiana up through West Virginia and then finally up into the Northeast. You can see right now that bullseye of heavy accumulations is just off the coast. So if that low moves a little bit closer, that's where those foot or more of snow will be right over Maine and New York. But as for right now, this is what the forecast models are showing. You can see pretty heavy accumulations in parts of southern Texas and southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana. That's where you're picking up maybe 6 inches of snow. Possibly some places could be getting 8 inches. That's why we had those major impacts showing up in Arkansas right there. And then you can also see large accumulations in West Virginia and Virginia, working into Pennsylvania and New Jersey, as well as that storm just strips across the region. The thing I'm most concerned about, though, is that ice. So you can see it right there. There already is some ice. This storm has already been affecting Texas, and this is showing what's still to come. That's what we're expected to pick up by this afternoon. And keep in mind, this is talking about the ice that's going to accumulate on the ground. So right there, that shows maybe a half an inch of ice. When you get conditions like that, and it looks like even more than half an inch working through Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, and then, like I said, working its way into North Carolina and Virginia as well. That, I usually don't like to use those big, scary words, but the National Weather Service was even saying that when you have more than a half an inch of ice accumulating on the ground, it basically cripples your roadways because your roads basically become undrivable. So if you are driving, that's something to keep in mind if you live in this strip of ice accumulation right there. And then, like I also said, it's also the ice that can lead to some of those power outages. That's significant. It shows you that there's extremely cold temperatures. That is one of the big things that is going on throughout the country right now. So that is something to keep in mind, but there is a silver lining. I keep saying that again. Those cold temperatures will be weakening throughout the next few days. It's still going to be cold over the next few days, as I'll show you right now. But as we get into next week, and especially this time next week, we're actually going to be back above average temperatures. But looking at this map, the first thing I want to point out is, one, what's really driving this system? Why is this system creating such major impacts the way it is? And I think there's two things going on. One, it's dipped down here into the Gulf of Mexico. You can actually see where these winds converge. That's a low pressure. So you think about it, winds flow into a low pressure, and hopefully the graphics are good enough right here for you to actually see that. But you can see it just flowing into this low right here, and that does two things. Underneath it, that's pulling in this moisture. So that's what's bringing in the water vapor that allows all those clouds to form that create the snow and the ice and the rain in the first place. But as that moisture comes in, another factor comes into play. Since winds flow into a low, you can also see these winds flowing down and pulling down that cold Arctic air all the way down from Canada, actually. So it's the combination of the two. We're bringing in moisture, but we're also bringing down cold air. So that's what's allowing that moisture to fall in the form of snow and ice as far south as Texas and Louisiana. So if you actually look in here, you can see how cold it is throughout this part of the country right now. We're below freezing. And one thing I will point out is the places you want to watch out for with ice are right where you have that separation, where you're right along the borderline of the below freezing temperatures shown here in blue and the above freezing temperatures shown here in green. Where you're right on that borderline, that's where rain can fall, and then when it hits the cold pavement, it can freeze. So right there, in the separation between green and blue, is where you want to watch out for that ice. And you'll notice that it, for the most part, follows where we do see those ice accumulations on the other map I was just showing you. So you can see as we get into tonight, that cold air is going to push back down, possibly freeze some of that rain that's falling throughout the day in the places that are above freezing. And then some at least encouraging aspects are it's at least getting a little bit warmer. It's still below freezing throughout most of Texas as you wake up tomorrow, but we're at least not below zero anymore. There were some spots in, I believe it was Lubbock and Amarillo, that were actually below zero the other day, and you can see now they're 8 and 16. That's certainly nothing to be too excited about because it's still extremely cold, but it's at least not below zero. And then you can see as I continue to click through here, that trend is going to continue. As I click through, it looks like Friday, we finally start to break that just complete below freezing temperatures. We're still around 46 in Houston, 32 in Dallas, 50 in Lubbock, 52 in San Antonio. But that's at least much warmer than it is right now. And that's getting into Friday. Then overnight temperatures drop back below zero. But then as we get into this weekend and the start of next week, we're really going to start to see things change. Well, that's definitely not correct. We're definitely not going to be negative 460 degrees. But you can tell by the color that the map is still correct, even if the numbers aren't. That shows we're going to be above freezing throughout this whole region as we get into this weekend. And then towards the start of next week, we're actually going to be above average temperatures. So I'll show you those overall climatological average maps in a second, but first I want to show what's going on with the temperature anomalies. So this shows you how far off of the average your temperatures are. Right now you can see still extremely cold, stretching all the way from Minnesota down to Texas, where we're still 35 to 45 degrees below average. That's what's been causing all these extreme power outages that we've had. But as I click through this map, you'll notice Thursday we're still 35 degrees below average, but that the overall area that's covered by that extreme cold seems to be lessening. And then as we go into Friday, you can see it starts to move east as the system that's causing this cold air moves east. And then look at that. We finally don't have those 30 to 40 degree below average temperatures as we get into this weekend. We do still have areas of the Northeast that are 20 below average, but throughout Texas, as we get into Sunday and Monday, that I almost smiled as I said it, because you can see we're already going to start to get above average in some places of Texas as we get into the start of next week. Couple little bursts of that cold air returning, but by the time we get into this time next week, you can see almost the entire eastern half of the country is going to be above average temperatures. And I know that might be a little difficult what I was just showing right there, so I pulled these maps up because I think it illustrates what I was trying to just show a bit better. So this shows the average 6 days out to 10 days out. So for the next 6 days, it's still going to be pretty cold. Don't think I'm saying we're in the clear. It's still 35 to 45 degrees below average right now, and we're still going to be 20 to 25 degrees below average for the next few days, which would be a story in and of itself. But as we get to 6 to 10 days, this is the average we're going to have across the country. The Northwest is now slightly below average, and then the rest of the country is either right on their average or actually above average. So I know anybody in Texas or Louisiana right now is probably loving this graphic, as it shows in 6 days to the next 10 days, you're actually going to be above average temperatures. You're going to be out of that Arctic cold that we've been dealing with for so long. And then this shows 10 to 14 days out. It looks like there's actually a clearly defined split in the country where the western half of the country is below average temperatures, and then the eastern half of the country is above average temperatures. And let's just see what that is. That's about maybe 30 degrees above average right there with your above average temperatures. So that's pretty significant right there, and I'm sure it is going to be welcomed after this bitter cold we've been dealing with for so long. Again, that one is 10 to 14 day average of how far you'll be off of your usual temperatures. So this is another graphic I want to show that explains why that cold is leaving. I know it might be hard to believe, considering this is what the map looks like right now, 35 to 45 degrees below average. But it actually, and then I said that this is what it's going to look like after 6 to 10 days from now. But it makes sense looking at this map. So give me a second. I know this map is a little, doesn't seem like it should be related because it's showing vorticity here. But it's helpful to look at this blob up here. This is actually a forecast run from a week ago. And I purposely chose a forecast run from a week ago because I want to show what the mechanism has been that's been pulling all that cold Arctic air all the way down into Texas. And for the most part, it's had to do with this giant circle you see up here above North Dakota, all the way up here in Canada. This is what many people would call the polar vortex. I typically don't like to use that term because I feel it's a little sensationalized, but that has been what's causing this cold Arctic air down, reaching all the way down into Texas, that's causing all those power outages. So watch as I click through here. Notice it's spinning and rotating, and it's just sitting right over Minnesota and the Midwest for the last week right there. And what that's been doing, if you think about while it spins, what those winds are doing around this low, it's counterclockwise circulation. So right here, think about it, it's pulling that cold Arctic air down from Canada and pushing it into the middle of the country. So that's pushing that cold air in, what you could call the polar vortex. And then at the same time, we've had a number of low pressure systems move across the southern part of the country. And like I was saying earlier, winds flow into a low pressure system. So then that has further been pulling that cold air down all the way down into Texas. Now, you can see that a little bit better on this map if you actually want to see how the winds move around it. That's actually showing it. Right now, it's above the northeast. Remember, this was showing about a week ago. I just wanted to illustrate how that oscillating, I don't know if oscillating is the right word, but just rotating polar vortex up there in Canada has been pushing all that cold air in. If you want to see that another way, you can actually see those winds spinning around this low. And it doesn't look as strong as it did last week because it is weakening, but you can see how that works. Right where you have those winds right there, you can actually see it pulling down those below zero temperatures. And that's actually what's causing the temperatures in the northeast to cool down right now, as you can see that cold air being pushed into the region. So that's basically what's been going on. And here's where the good news is. That's leaving. It's weakening. It's finally moving out of the country. That rotating low up there that's been bringing in that cold air for the last 2 weeks, you can see it right there. I was just showing it above the northeast. Watch what happens right there as I click through. This is now a current model. As I click through the next couple days, you can see it's still doing that rotation. So that's why the northeast is going to be the next to cool off. But then it finally moves off. It looks like by Friday into Saturday and then Sunday and Monday, that will finally be gone. The polar vortex that's been causing those 35 to 45 degree below average temperatures for the last week will finally be gone as we move through this weekend. And then, like I said, towards the start of next week, it actually looks like we're going to be above average temperatures throughout the entire eastern half of the country. Now, the other thing you might notice on this map is what's going on with that trough right there. And that is actually our storm system that we're following throughout this video. You can see, while this shows vorticity, don't worry too much about that term. You can just think of it as storm energy. And you can see this is a significant trough that's causing this storm in the first place. And you can also see that it's significant by all of that vorticity or storm energy that it has associated with it. Now, one other thing that I always look at when seeing if a storm is strengthening is how far apart the isobars are. Right here, you can see the lines of constant pressure are pretty evenly spaced and spread out. And then as that energy or the vorticity moves through the trough, and then we start pulling in some of that moisture and energy from the Gulf of Mexico, you'll notice those isobars start to tighten. And that's where the storm starts to strengthen, as we saw in the precipitation map, where it actually looks like it's strengthening as it gets right over Louisiana and Mississippi at this point in the storm. And then you can just watch as it moves almost like a wave across the country. I'll back that up just in case you missed it. You can see it's basically shows exactly where that storm is going to be affecting the most, stretching all the way from Texas down up to Pennsylvania, and then it will move across the country. We will have some heavy rain down here in the southeast as well. Now, the other thing you might be looking at on this map, I know there's a lot going on, so I'm trying to cover it all, is that little blast of energy pushing into the Pacific Northwest, starting, well, let's see when it first comes in. Looks like right about there, you can see the first little traces of this storm, and that's getting into Thursday afternoon into early Friday morning, and then it looks like it moves through at a relatively quick pace. So I actually want to look at that one first. The big story we're talking about is obviously that big snowstorm and the ice storm and the Arctic cold temperatures down here in the south, but I will just briefly mention that storm in the west here. So you can see we're in the clear for the most part throughout the day today, and then tomorrow afternoon is when that new system pushes in. Looks like we're going to be getting heavy snow throughout Washington, Oregon, northern California, very northern parts of California, and then some heavy rain along the coast. So I think a better way to actually view that is looking at the pattern as it comes in. you can see that little trough start to push through Washington Thursday afternoon, build in across the region, and then move into the center of the country. If we want to take a more regional look at that, you can see we're still actually getting some light snow. That's some remnants from the storm that's now over Texas. And then that's finally going to weaken, go away. And then by Thursday afternoon is when that new system pushes in. Heavy snow throughout the Cascades. But I think this graphic almost perfectly summarizes what's going on with the storm. Heavy snow throughout the Cascades, heavy rain along the coast, and then just very northern California getting the bulk of the storm. Light parts of it will push into as far south as the Bay Area and into Tahoe at some points, but for the most part, that basically sums up what's going on. Cascades, Washington, and Oregon getting the majority of the action with this storm. So when is that one gone? Looks like you almost get a second pulse of it around early Saturday morning, Friday night. That's where the major effects look to be more in California and Oregon right along the border, and then another little system after that. But we could just keep clicking through this forever. It seems like there's just non-stop systems moving through Washington and Oregon there. What we want to see is how much snow we're actually going to be picking up in the next few days. It looks like by Monday, so even in less than the next week, looks like the very northern parts of Washington could be getting over 2 to 3 feet of snow. Looks like parts of Oregon could get up into that 2-foot range. And then California, like I said, this is a northern storm. Washington feeling the heaviest effects. Just the very northern parts of California picking up possibly a foot of snow in some areas. So it looks like Washington's the bullseye. So let's zoom in there. You can see it starts to come in 10 a.m. Thursday. They're going to feel it first because it's moving from north to south. So heavy snow throughout the Cascades. Looks like the heaviest snow right around 4 p.m. on Thursday. That continues. And then looks like that storm weakens by about 4 p.m. on Saturday before the next one moves in on Sunday. So a lot that we're going to have to keep our eye on throughout Washington over the next few days in every single forecast that I do. If we want to see that snowfall pile up in Washington, you can see by Sunday at 4 p.m., there are parts of Washington that could have 3 feet of snow built up in the very northern parts of the Cascades. Now, I also want to show California just to show that this is really just a northern storm. It shows up 10 a.m. Thursday, very northern parts of California. Coast gets that heavy rain, and then it will spread out into the Bay Area, getting some light rain, some light snow up into the Sierras, but that's certainly not the bulk of the storm. The bulk of it, as I just showed, falls in Washington. Where it does look like California is going to get some more of the effects is Friday night into Saturday morning as we get that heavier rain along the coast and some heavier snow up into the California mountains. But again, Bay Area, for the most part, we're going to get some rain, but not that heavy rainfall we've been used to throughout this winter. I'll just quickly show the accumulated snowfall. Looks like that basically sums up what I was saying. Possibly an inch, or possibly a foot in the very northern parts of California. For the most part, probably just 6 to 8. And then you can see, for the most part, Tahoe barely getting anything. Maybe an inch or 2. But we'll have to keep our eye on it because that's a little ways off in the forecast. So we'll stay updated with that one. Overall in the West, you can see we do have some winter storm advisories in place. I imagine those will turn into winter storm warnings as that new system pushes in. The big thing that your eye's probably going to, and you're wondering why I'm not currently talking about it, is what's going on down here in the south. So let's transition here and just spend the rest of this live stream breaking down the storm, looking at where the snow is falling, where the ice is falling, how much we're accumulating, when is it falling, who's getting it, all the possible questions we could have. Let's just talk about this storm for the next 30 minutes. You can see this winter storm warning stretching all the way from Texas all the way up into West Virginia and Virginia. And the reason for that is because there are some major impacts that are expected. As we zoom in here, you can see the just long stretch that the storm is going to reach, going all the way from southeast southwestern Texas all the way up into Pennsylvania and then eventually up into the northeast. That's the question mark territory that we'll get to at the end of the video to see what's the likelihood of that actually happening. What is likely, though, is what's going on right now. Impacts in Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, where we have large amounts of snow building up in Arkansas, and then the big thing I'm worried about is the large amount of ice in Texas and Louisiana. So we can actually see that on this map, and this is the reason those major impacts are expected. The red right there is major impacts, orange is your moderate, the yellow is the minor. But as we've seen, even though we don't see major impacts down here in Texas, this is such a rare storm to happen. I was looking at one article this morning that said a storm like this hasn't happened in Texas in a decade. And especially when you consider all the power outages, I believe those are still going on. The most recent article I could find said many people are still without power, which is crucial because keep in mind the temperatures are below freezing down here. So if you can't turn on a heater, that is certainly a major impact. So even though that doesn't show up on this map, I don't believe this is taking into account the millions of people that are now without power while the temperatures are below freezing. So if we want to actually look at that snow and that ice, the things I'm worried about as this system moves through, you can see that's showing early this morning that ice all over Texas, then moving into Louisiana, then Mississippi, heavy snowfall throughout Arkansas and Mississippi, and then it's going to be working its way up into West Virginia, Virginia. That's another bullseye region that we're going to be looking at where it looks like they're going to be getting maybe more than a half an inch of ice. And then we're also going to keep our eye on the southeast, as you can see, heavy rain. So we'll see how much rain we're going to be picking up as well. First thing we should do, though, is look at where this storm is right now. So that's this morning. See that snow building into Arkansas. Oklahoma actually picked up some decent snowfall totals early this morning, probably woke up to it. And then it started to move into Arkansas as that ice built into eastern Texas and Louisiana. Now right here, I showed it earlier in the video, but this is where the storm starts to strengthen. I showed the vorticity map where you could see the energy moving into the right-hand part of this trough as this moisture is being pulled in from the Gulf of Mexico, allowing all this precipitation to form. And then since that cold Arctic air is over this region, the precipitation can fall as snow and ice. That might be the key time that I'm worried about. This is this afternoon where that heavy ice that's looking at maybe 0.2 to 0.5 inches per hour accumulating in eastern Texas and Louisiana. And then snow building into Arkansas. It looks like some heavy snow in Arkansas. Heavy rain where the temperatures are warmer. So the biggest thing that I think we should spend the most time on is where the ice is accumulating. So that's a snapshot of what we're going to accumulate by about this time tomorrow. Zooming in here, you can see there are some places that are picking up, it shows 0.8 inches of ice. I've rarely seen any places pick up more than a half an inch of ice. So that area right there from eastern Texas working into Louisiana and then even into Mississippi as well, that's the key spot that you're especially going to want to watch out if you're traveling on the roadways. But then also keep in mind for any types of power outages, because that ice is one of the key things that plays a role in those power outages happening. That's the stretch right there, going all the way from southern Texas through Mississippi, and then eventually I'll show it's working actually all the way up into Virginia as well. But that's the key area that we want to look at right there. We'll look at eastern Texas first. So this was 6 a.m. this morning. We'll go to 12 p.m., which is right about now in Texas, I believe. Not totally sure on the time difference. Maybe it's 2 hours. So this is at least what you can be expecting in the near future in Texas. That's that heavy ice accumulation. That's where you're maybe picking up 1/4 of an inch to a half an inch of ice. That's where roadways get dangerous. That's where power outages can continue to be a concern. But then you can see in the northern parts of the states where we're more below that freezing line, that's where we're actually picking up some snow right now. So I just want to go through excuse me, take a closer look at that ice. Looks like, yeah, eastern part of the state, that's where we're getting over a half an inch of ice. And then parts of going from Waco to Austin, that's where we're getting maybe a tenth of an inch to a quarter of an inch, which it really doesn't take all that much ice to make your roadways dangerous. So even if you're out of that bullseye, you still got to watch out right there. So the other spot that we saw that ice building in was Louisiana, and quite possibly even more. That looks to be happening right about now as well, where we're getting 0.2 to 0.5 inches per hour of ice building up. And then that's going to move through. Looks like it's gone by about 12 a.m. But then it shows up again 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, but just a lighter version. You know, I should probably show when it's going to be gone in Texas. Looks like that first wave is gone, accumulating by 12 a.m., but it might still be on the roadways. And then it looked like we get another little patch of light ice 6 a.m. Thursday morning. Excuse me. So, looking at Louisiana, there's that light ice. Let's actually see how much is going to be accumulating. There might be some areas in Louisiana that get an inch of ice accumulation. So that right there is the key spot that you want to watch out for. Now, the other thing you noticed on the map was where that snow was accumulating. Right in Arkansas, and you can see Oklahoma has already picked up 1 to 3 inches of snow right there, possibly 5 inches in some places. The other areas getting the most snow are down here in southwestern Texas, getting 6 to 8 inches. Again, the only reason that's possible is because that cold Arctic air still sitting over the region, 35 to 45 degrees below average. But again, the good news is by this time next week, much of this region should actually be above average. So this cold isn't going to last for much longer. The other bullseye you see is in northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, getting 6 to 8 inches in some places. So that could be another good spot to zoom in to keep our eye on the snow accumulations. Looks like it's already starting to fall in Arkansas, picking up as we get into tonight. Looks like Mississippi's getting some heavy snowfall as well. And then for the most part, that snow is going to be gone. Overall, as we accumulate it, as you can see, El Dorado getting up to 8 inches, but majority of the state at least getting 1 inch, large portions in that 2 to 5 inch range. So that's why we had major impacts down here in Arkansas and then working into northern Louisiana. That's where we're picking up maybe 8 inches of snow, and then just south of that, we're possibly picking up an inch of ice. So that's the big story when it comes to this storm. Where are we getting those large snow accumulations, and where are we getting those large ice accumulations? Now again, the complete reason for that, the reason we're getting that snow all the way down in Louisiana, as far south as parts of Texas, very southern Texas is what I mean to say. The reason for that is that cold air that you can see is still over this entire region. Just again, the green color means you're above freezing. The blue color means you're below freezing. Now, the one, I guess, positive is we're at least no longer seeing purple color on this map, which shows where you're actually below zero. And there were some points when I was forecasting Texas this last week where Texas was in fact below zero. So even though we're still below freezing, which is 32 degrees, the bright side is we're at least moving in the right direction. We're starting to warm up, and that will actually continue as we move forward in the forecast. Now you can see that low though right there. That's this low causing this whole storm to happen. And you can see how the winds are flowing into the low, bringing that cold air down, which is causing all that snow and ice to be able to form and fall. And then you can see it's also pushing in moisture. So it's almost a double-edged sword. I don't know if that's the right term to use here, but it's basically working in two ways. It's bringing down the cold air, and it's pushing in the moisture, which is allowing that snow and ice to fall. And then the key spots you want to look out for are right along that borderline of where you're right around 32 degrees, because that's where you can have rain fall, and then the second it hits the cold pavement, it freezes. And that's often where you see those areas that are picking up the most the most ice is right along that border in eastern Texas and Louisiana, where that rain can fall and then quickly freeze when it hits the cold surface. So what you're probably interested in is what our daytime highs are going to be. So it looks like today, much of northern and eastern Texas, as well as Louisiana, are still seeing daytime highs around 32 degrees or lower. As we look at the daytime highs for tomorrow, looks to be about the same story as that high moves through, continues to bring that cold air through. That's that high that's allowing that cold air to sit over the region. So it looks like we're still below freezing tomorrow, although it looks to be slightly warmer. And then as we get into Friday, that's where we start to see this warm up start to move in the right direction. We're at least seeing less of the blue color, which indicates where you're below freezing. Looks like Friday, majority of Texas, except for maybe the very northeastern parts, are at least above freezing. We're still cold, 37 in San Antonio, 43 in San Angelo. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But it looks like we're actually starting to warm up as we get into Friday. As we get into Saturday, the warming trend continues. Now, almost all of Texas is above that freezing line. Still cold. Dallas, 37. Lubbock, 52. It's certainly still cold, but we're continuing to move in the right direction. Let's see if it gives us the temperatures for Sunday. Yeah, that's where the map got all messed up. We are certainly not going to be negative 460 degrees. So let's just go back here where the map's actually working and watch that low pressure system as it moves through the southeast. Now that cold borderline right there, where we have below freezing to the west, above freezing to the east, that's going to be your separation. Right here is where you can get some snow. Right here is where you're going to be getting that ice. Right here is where you're going to be getting heavy rain. So that's the next thing I want to look at, because that is, well, it's not as big of a story as the ice and snow that we're seeing in multiple parts of the country. Heavy rain is certainly something to keep our eye on, because some places could have a flood concern. Right now, I'd just say it's a slight risk when it comes to the flooding, but it's something to keep in mind. So as we get into tonight, working into Thursday, that's where that heavy rain moves across the southeast, and you'd notice it was for the most part above Georgia and South Carolina. But before I show that, I think this map's a little bit out of order. Actually, no, it's not. I just forgot to point out the biggest part of this story when clicking through this map. The biggest part of this story, can't believe I missed it, is what's going on in Mississippi and Alabama right here. So that's actually as we get into tonight and early Thursday morning. Very glad I put this tab in here, and because I would have probably missed this, and this is in fact the biggest part of the story for the southeast right here. You can see Mississippi getting heavy snowfall tonight into tomorrow morning, that heavy ice accumulation in the central parts of the state, and then heavy rain in the southern parts of the state. And then as the system moves up near Tennessee and West Virginia, that's where the lingering effects will just be the heavy rain throughout the region, lasting over Georgia and South Carolina, working all the way into Friday, and then finally gone by Saturday. So let's take a close look at that major part of the southeast that we want to look at. Looks like it's going to start to build in actually 12 p.m. Wednesday. And then 6 p.m. Wednesday is when, so the timing almost looks a little bit different on this map. So 6 p.m. Wednesday, that's this afternoon into tonight, is where we're getting that heavy snow in Mississippi, the 0.2 to 0.5 inches of ice per hour starting to fall on the surface, and the heavy rain in the southern parts of the state. Then as we get into 12 a.m. Thursday, that's where the ice moves up into the very northern parts of Alabama, and then that heavy rain just starts to build in across the region. So the key times to watch out for right there are, well, right now, working into this evening and tonight if you're living in Mississippi or northern parts of Alabama. So this is what I also want to show, where that heavy rain is going to be falling. You can see right around here, it's not as much because we're actually getting ice and snow, but then right there in Georgia, South Carolina, where all of the precipitation is falling as rain, there are some places that could be getting 3 to 4 inches, but majority of the state getting at least 1 inch. So that's where I will keep my eye on that location to see if we have any flood threats going on. So just to illustrate that as it moves across the southeast right there, what we were just talking about, it digs down here. This is the trough that's causing this whole storm in the first place. It digs down. This is where it starts to strengthen, brings in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, still pulling down that cold air, and then you'll see it stretch all the way from Texas up into Pennsylvania and the northeast. And then it moves up and across the region into the northeast as we get into Friday and Saturday. That's actually a pretty good illustration for this graphic. You can see it almost just moves straight up and through Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and into the northeast. So we can see that another way by looking at the precipitation map. There's that as it strengthens, pulling in that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, then it starts to spread out. That's where it's pushing up and hitting West Virginia and Virginia. Looks like there's large amounts of ice right there between Virginia and North Carolina. We're going to have to keep our eye on that one. And then it starts to move off the coast. And then later we'll be looking at what happens with the northeast, as that's the big question mark in the forecast. But the first thing I want to focus on is that West Virginia, North Carolina, because it looks like that's another key area where we're going to have major impacts with this storm. Looks like the first effects will be tonight into early tomorrow morning as we get some heavy snow building into Kentucky, Tennessee, and then that heavy rain in the southern locations where it's warmer. Now, the key spot I think to worry about is early Thursday morning, as you might be commuting to work or just waking up, as that's when that bullseye of ice is going to be right over Virginia and North Carolina. Again, where you're above freezing, you get that heavy rain. Where you're below freezing, well below freezing, you get that heavy snow. You can see maybe 0.2 to 0.5 inches per hour building into West Virginia and northern parts of Virginia. And then right on that border is where you get the ice. And that's going to continue throughout the day Thursday, as especially this region right here, which I'll show in a second, remains cold and cold enough to continue to accumulate that snow and ice. So if we want to actually see the accumulated ice as it moves through, that's our bullseye that I'm worried about. That's where we could be getting 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch to possibly even more than 1/2 an inch of ice accumulating in Virginia and North Carolina right there. You can see also 1/10 of an inch building through Alabama, through Tennessee, and then parts of West Virginia as well. North Carolina, large portions of the state getting at least 1/4 of an inch. But that is the key spot to watch out for if you're living in this area and plan on driving anytime Thursday or Friday. That's where the ice is going to be building up. Now, and also that's where some power outages are promoted by all that cold air and ice, which is certainly something we're dealing with in Texas right now. When it comes to the accumulated snowfall, this is actually sometimes a useful thing to look at, because right along that borderline is typically where you have to start worrying about the ice, because you're not cold enough to get snow and you're not warm enough to just get rain. Is right along that border that I bet if we click back and forth, it almost perfectly matches it. Yeah, it almost perfectly shows that the ice is going to form right where you're in that borderline. So if your temperatures are 32 degrees, that's when you might want to watch out, because that's where rain can fall, hit the cold sidewalk, and freeze. But that is a significant story in itself. That heavy snow or large snow accumulations that are going to be building all the way from eastern Kentucky through West Virginia, working into Pennsylvania and New Jersey, where some locations should be seeing 6 to 8 inches, possibly even 10 inches in select locations. So there's obviously a key place that we have to focus in on this region. So let's look at the exact timing. Looks about 1 a.m. on Thursday. That's when that snow and rain starts to build in and the first little traces of that ice. By 7 a.m. Thursday, that's the bulk of this storm. That's where you're getting heavy snowfall rates up in West Virginia, then that heavy ice accumulation, like I showed, possibly 1/2 an inch of ice building into Virginia and North Carolina, and then heavy rain in southern parts of North Carolina. and then that's going to continue throughout the day Thursday. So it's not just going to be a morning thing. It looks like we're still picking up ice as we get into 1 p.m. Thursday, even 7 p.m. Thursday. Basically, Virginia and this stretch in North Carolina picking up ice all day long Thursday, even working into Friday morning as well. And then it looks like the very last traces of the storm will just drop some snow 1 p.m. Friday, and then the storm is finally gone. So again, the big thing to look out for there is where that ice is going to be falling. Looks like there's this bullseye where we're getting a half an inch, and then a large, almost all of Virginia getting at least a tenth of an inch. Parts of North Carolina getting quarter of an inch to a half an inch as well. So that's the key spot that I'm going to continue to talk about, especially in tomorrow morning's forecast, as it looks like the majority of that is going to be falling on Thursday. And then when it comes to the snowfall, as we click through here, you can see West Virginia, again, 6 to 8 inches there. Very northern parts of Virginia getting 6 to 8 inches as well. So I keep talking about that borderline between where you're below freezing and above freezing is where you're getting the ice. So let's actually let's check it out again. Where was the time where we had the most ice? It was right there. That's 7 a.m. on Thursday. So let's actually go to 7 a.m. on Thursday on this map and see what this region looks like. So I'll zoom in here so you can see it better. You can see that's exactly where we're right in that borderline of below freezing and above freezing, right around 32 degrees. So that's where the rain can fall and then turn to ice. Right where we see that in Virginia, North Carolina, we're right around that borderline of 32 degrees. That's where we see the most ice building in right there. And it's especially true when you start working throughout the day Thursday. That's where your rain can continue to fall. But even though it's now 1 p.m. on Thursday, getting into 4 p.m., this is when your daytime highs should be. That region right there where we're seeing the largest impacts with this storm is where that cold air persists, even though it's getting into the middle of the afternoon. So that right there is something I'm most likely going to be spending the majority of my time on tomorrow morning, as that's going to be the major impacts we're feeling tomorrow. That ice and that half an inch to even more of ice building into Virginia, North Carolina, and then to possibly 6 to 8 inches of snow building into West Virginia and Northern Virginia. The other thing I'm going to be spending a large amount of time on tomorrow is what's going to happen to this low pressure system after it moves off of North Carolina and Virginia. You can see it moves off right there. But the question is, will it move straight off into the Atlantic or will it hug the coast? Because depending on what the answer is to that question is going to determine what kind of weather the Northeast gets. Yesterday, the model had this low moving right along the East Coast, so large areas were picking up 6 inches to a foot of snow. Now the model, as I click through here, has the low moving a bit farther off into the Atlantic. It's still moving up relatively close to the coast, close enough to still get some snow, but it's trending as moving farther away. So if that trend continues, that means the Northeast might not get any snow with this one. But like I always say, weather models change rapidly. And this is one of the things that I've found they're not the best at forecasting with. So it'll be interesting to watch to see if that low does end up moving along the coast. And why is that so important? Well, it's important because you get the two things that I was talking about earlier that are affecting Texas. That same thing can affect the Northeast, where on the left side of the low, you're bringing down cold air. You think about the counterclockwise circulation here. Right there, you'd be bringing down this cold air from Canada. And then on the right side, you're pushing in that moisture. So when the low is right off of New Jersey or New York, you're pulling that cold air in, and then you're pushing in the moisture at the same time. As of right now, when the low moves far off into the Atlantic like it's showing, you're not pushing the moisture in, you're just pulling down the cold air. So the precipitation and the snowfall totals you get aren't as high. But as of right now, the model still does have it moving close enough to get some snow, and in some cases actually some pretty decent snow. So this storm still looks like it will be impacting the Northeast. I just emphasized that earlier because it's still a bit questionable. So this is showing, looks like New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania, parts of New York should be getting some snow tomorrow afternoon, getting into tomorrow evening. As that low, we might see it pop into the screen. There it is, right there, as it moves along the coast. So this basically illustrates what I'm talking about. If that low was right here, we would be seeing heavy snowfall rates throughout the entire Northeast. Because it's all the way off here in the Atlantic, very just coastal locations of New Jersey, Massachusetts, parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, getting some light snow. So that's why the key thing we'll be watching in tomorrow morning's forecast is where that low is going to be put in that next forecast model run. That's why sometimes watching these forecast models is so exciting, because every single day changes. So what you might have thought was true yesterday is the complete opposite of what might be happening today. So it's fun to watch it every single day as those models develop. And the good news is, the closer you get to the actual weather happening and the closer you get to actually being impacted by a storm, the better the models get. More than 3 days out, they're a bit shaky. As you get to maybe 1 day out to the morning of, they're pretty reliable. Actually, surprisingly reliable when you think of how many dozens of variables and ridiculously difficult programming and math equations that go into making these forecasts in the first place. So that was a bit of a tangent there. Let's just get back to the issue at hand by looking at where those snowfall accumulations appear to be falling. So I might have given the impression that the Northeast is completely missing out on this storm, but as you can see, parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts will be in that strip of heavy snowfall accumulations where we could be getting 6 to 8 inches with this storm. The reason I'm not spending too much time on this is that low is most likely going to move in tomorrow morning's forecast, so that is most likely going to change as well. But as of right now, looks like New Jersey and parts of Pennsylvania are getting 6 to 8 inches, with the very coastal parts of Massachusetts as well. Now, I'll just say it one last time, if that low does move closer to the coast, that bullseye right there where we're getting maybe a foot is actually going to be right over Maine, and this whole thing will just shift farther inland. So let's take one local look. Let's see when this timing might come in. Looks like the first snow shows up 7 a.m. on Thursday. Heavier snow building in 1 p.m. Thursday. Might have to worry about some ice in the more southern locations of New Jersey. Light snow as we get into 7 p.m. Thursday. And then that light snow continues into early Friday morning. And then even into Friday evening and Saturday early morning as well. Massachusetts still picking up some light snow as that low moves up and out of the coast. So total accumulated snowfall, first little traces showing up 7 a.m. Thursday, building in. That's showing New York City. This is actually increased from yesterday's model. Now it shows maybe 6 inches of snow building in right there. That's about 2 inches more than yesterday's was showing. So again, we're going to have to keep our eye and see how this model develops, because right now it looks like majority of New Jersey is in that bullseye of 6 to 8 inches, part of Massachusetts as well. So we'll keep our eye on that, because I guarantee that model right there will change by tomorrow morning. So I know we talked about a lot throughout this video, so let's just try to do a summary of the forecast in general. The big story was that major ice and snowstorm that's working through Texas, bringing a half an inch to even an inch of ice in some locations in eastern Texas and Louisiana, making roadways dangerous, certain leads is a danger for more power outages, and then heavy snowfall building into northern Louisiana and Arkansas, major impacts expected there. Then you can almost see it start to strengthen as it pulls in this moisture, continuing to pull down this cold air as it moves into West Virginia and Virginia. That's going to be the key place we're looking at tomorrow, as large amounts of ice in Virginia and North Carolina, possibly half an inch or more accumulating, with 6 to 8 inches of snow building into West Virginia and northern parts of Virginia. Then the key thing we're going to be watching tomorrow is how close to the coast that low stays as it moves up through the northeast. But as of right now, New York City is forecasted to get 6 inches of snow with that system moving through. So again, just to show it one more time, there it is right now. It's actually going to strengthen throughout the day today, bring large amounts of snow and ice to Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and then move up into West Virginia, and then finally up and into the northeast. The one other thing we were talking about in this video was the new system coming in on the west. I don't imagine this is going to have too major of impacts. Right now it just looks like your average winter storm, but we did go over that, looked at heavy rain along the coast, heavy snowfall in the Cascades, especially in Washington, with just the very northern parts of California participating in the larger accumulations with that storm. So when it comes to the impacts expected, like I said, in the west, just a minor impacts, your average winter storm there. What isn't an average storm is what's going on down here, stretching all the way from Texas to Pennsylvania and even into the New York and Massachusetts. But you see the bullseye of where the biggest impacts are expected. Arkansas, where we have 6 to 8 inches of snow, and then in Louisiana and eastern Texas, where ice, I think, is honestly the biggest threat with that storm. Leads to your travel concerns and also those power outages that we're currently dealing with. So that is the stretch. The big thing we're going to be looking at tomorrow is West Virginia and Virginia, as it looks like they're going to have their biggest impacts tomorrow. So when it comes to the warnings, just to reiterate, basically what I was just showing, that winter storm warning stretching all the way from Texas up into West Virginia and Virginia. And then we'll have to keep our eye on the northeast. And then just one final thing I think to really wrap this up is the reason we have these winter storm warnings all the way down here in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, the reason we're picking up possibly a half an inch of ice and 8 inches of snow as far south as Louisiana and Arkansas, the reason for that is that cold Arctic air that's still over this region. It seems to be the major story that I've been talking about for about 2 weeks now, the fact that we're 35 to 45 degrees below average temperatures. The good news is, though, and there is some good news, it's starting to weaken. As we talked about earlier, over the next few days, and especially getting into this weekend, and especially as we get into this time next week, that cold Arctic air is finally going to be leaving the U.S. What's been plaguing us for about 2 weeks now, where we've had below zero temperatures, minus 50-degree wind chills. In Texas, we've had power outages all across the state because it's simply too cold to run your power facilities. That is finally coming to an end as we get into this weekend and later next week. You just notice as I click through here, this is now, I'll just click through again so we can see it. That's right now. There's that blob of 35 to 45 degree below average temperatures as I click into Thursday, and then Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and finally this time next week, we are moving back into the above average temperatures. So I know you might be absolutely sick of this winter weather, all the snow, the ice, the power outages, the cold if you're living in Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, but the end is in sight. It looks like there is some good news on the horizon as 6 days from now to about 14 days from now, the overall climatological forecast has you guys above average for that entire time. So where you've been cold for the last 2 weeks, for after the next few days of continued cold, it looks like you're finally going to start warming up and we won't have these ice and snow warnings down all the way down in Texas and Louisiana anymore. But, I mean, that's a long ways off in the forecast, so we'll have to keep our eye on it. If you want to keep your eye on it, you can subscribe where I do these forecasts every single morning. Thanks for watching, and just to wrap it up, my thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by the power outages in Texas. The good news is the end is in sight. It's going to start warming up soon. So hope you have a good day, and thanks for watching.